It started with a phone call I never expected, especially from people who had worked so hard to erase me from their lives. I remember that Thursday morning so clearly. It was gray, overcast, the kind of day where everything feels muted. I was standing in line at this small bakery near my apartment, waiting for my coffee and scrolling through emails I didn't really care about. My phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing across the screen. I almost didn't answer it. Almost. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just that strange ache in my chest that told me this call was different. Is this Ms. Ava Morgan? The voice was too formal to sound real, and there was this pause, too heavy to be casual. Yes, I replied, already feeling my body tense up. I'm calling regarding your grandfather, Walter Morgan. I froze right there in that bakery line. I hadn't heard that name spoken with sincerity in years. My family only mentioned him when they needed someone to blame for their bitterness, someone to use as an excuse for why their lives hadn't turned out the way they wanted. The voice on the other end continued. Mr. Morgan passed away last night, and you need to come in for the reading of his will. I blinked, confused. That can't be right. I haven't been part of that family in... I know. The voice cut in gently, almost sympathetically. But your grandfather left something behind, specifically for you. My world shifted in that moment, just slightly, but enough to make all those old wounds start pulsing again. All those memories I'd worked so hard to bury came flooding back. What did he leave me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The voice hesitated, and in that pause, I knew whatever came next would change everything. Ms. Morgan, he left you $750,000. The bakery noise vanished. The customers around me blurred into nothing. I gripped the counter to steady myself because I genuinely thought I might fall over. My family had cut me out. They'd erased me, pretended I never existed, convinced themselves and everyone else that I was the problem. But my grandfather, the quiet man who always watched from a distance, had left me nearly $1 million. And with it, every lie they had ever told was about to come crashing down. Let me tell you something about myself. I wasn't the problem child. I wasn't rebellious or loud or dramatic. I was simply inconvenient. I was born between two golden children, the adored older brother and the delicate younger sister, and I spent my entire childhood as the space in between them. I was the ghost at the dinner table, the name that never made it into family stories unless someone needed a comparison to make themselves look better. My mother used to say, Ava's independent. She doesn't need the attention her siblings do. But I knew the truth. Independence was just a pretty word for ignored. Birthdays forgotten. School events unattended. Conversations cut short the second someone brighter walked into the room. That was my childhood. That was my normal. And the only person who ever seemed to notice me, really notice me, was my grandfather, Walter. He wasn't affectionate, not warm in the traditional sense, but he had this quiet way of paying attention, like he was always listening to a radio no one else could hear. He'd slip me books when no one was looking. He'd ask me real questions about my life, not just the surface-level stuff. He'd leave small notes inside envelopes with my name spelled correctly, something my mother often didn't bother with. I didn't realize it then, but he was documenting everything. Every slight, every cruelty, every moment I was pushed aside. He was watching the family from the inside, taking notes like an investigator trapped among suspects. But me? I grew up thinking my invisibility was normal. I thought that's just how families worked, until the night everything shattered. My older brother got into a drunk driving accident, and even though I was miles away in another city, living my own life, my mother called me screaming, "This is your fault. You're never here when the family needs you." It made absolutely no sense, but it didn't need to. Blame was a reflex in that house. Someone always had to be at fault, and I was the easiest target. Months later, at a tense Thanksgiving dinner, the kind where you can feel the hostility vibrating in the air, My father finally said the words they had been inching toward for years. "Maybe it's better if you keep your distance from now on." Everyone at the table nodded. My mother looked relieved. My siblings didn't even look up from their plates. I left that house carrying nothing but a small bag of clothes and this crushing realization that I had been cut out long before they actually said it aloud. I had been erased, gradually, systematically, like someone slowly turning down the volume until you can't hear the music anymore. For years, I stayed gone. I built a small life for myself, quiet, steady, not impressive enough for them to regret losing me, but safe enough for me to survive. I thought that was the end of my story with them. But that phone call from the attorney shattered the silence my family had built around my name. Grandpa Walter hadn't forgotten me, and he had left more than money. He had left proof, receipts, letters, recordings, secrets the family prayed would never resurface. I sat in my car outside the attorney's office for what felt like hours, my fingers trembling against the steering wheel. The city moved around me, cars, voices, life, but I felt suspended in some strange alternative timeline where ghosts call you before noon and drop $750,000 surprises into your lap. I wasn't excited. I wasn't relieved. I was unsettled, because Walter Morgan didn't do anything casually. If he left me that amount of money, he left it intentionally, with a purpose sharp enough to cut. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just an inheritance. This was a message. I finally forced myself out of the car and headed inside. The office smelled like leather and old paper, the kind of place where secrets outlive the people who created them. An older attorney in a charcoal suit stood as I entered. "You must be Ava," he said, offering me a warm handshake. "I'm Daniel Crow, your grandfather's estate attorney." I sat across from him, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Let me start by saying," he began, "Walter spoke about you often." My throat tightened. No one in that house ever said that. "I'm not surprised," Crow replied gently, "but he documented everything. He kept records, meticulous ones." My heartbeat stumbled. What kind of records? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a thick, sealed envelope across the desk. It was worn around the edges, as if it had been handled many times. My name, Ava, written in clean, careful handwriting, my grandfather's handwriting. "He wanted you to open this privately," Crow said. "After I explained the inheritance?" I swallowed hard. "So the amount is correct?" $750,000? He nodded. "All liquid assets. He left nothing to anyone else." I blinked slowly, trying to process what I was hearing. "Nothing. Not even them," he said, understanding my question before I finished it. Walter was very clear. He said, and I quote, "Only one person in this family ever told the truth, and she's the one they tried most to silence." A chill passed through me, like the entire room had tilted on its axis. My grandfather had seen everything after all. Crow continued softly, "He also left instructions for me about your family. He believed they would come after you. He prepared protections." I let out a shaky breath. Why would they come after me? They haven't spoken to me in years. Crow gave me a look that said everything. People don't ignore money. People don't ignore guilt. And people definitely don't ignore the person holding both. He leaned forward. "There's something you need to understand, Ava. When a family decides someone is disposable, it's often because that person knows the truth. Your grandfather didn't want them rewriting your life once they realized what he left you." My chest tightened. So he knew they'd try to twist everything. "He didn't think, he knew," Crow said firmly. "I've seen families implode over far less." I stared at the envelope. My name seemed to pulse on the paper. "What exactly is in here?" I whispered. Crow hesitated only a moment. Walter's confession and his evidence. I felt those words in my bones. Evidence. Of what? Crow clarified, his tone grave. Financial fraud, emotional abuse, insurance misuse, a theft that happened in your childhood, and a full account of how they scapegoated you to cover it all. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My family stole something? Crow nodded, more than once. And your grandfather documented it all. He left it to you because you were the only one who didn't participate, and the only one they punished. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I had spent years thinking I was forgotten because I didn't matter. But now I understood the terrible truth. They didn't erase me because I was insignificant. They erased me because I knew too much. My grandfather had watched it all unfold, silently, carefully, patiently, and instead of confronting them, he'd spent years building a case they could never escape. I breathed out slowly, my fingertips tracing the edge of the envelope. What do I do with this? Crow's expression softened. You read it. You let yourself feel whatever you need to feel, and when you're ready, you decide what kind of ending this story deserves. I pressed that envelope to my chest as I left the office. The sky outside was still gray, but somehow heavier now, like the clouds were holding their breath with me. I didn't drive home. I couldn't. I parked at a quiet overlook and just sat there in the stillness, staring at my grandfather's handwriting on that envelope. Then, with a deep, steadying breath, I opened it. The first page was a letter. 4 handwritten words at the top. For the daughter, they failed. My throat tightened. My eyes stung with tears I'd been holding back for years. My grandfather had seen me, all along. I wiped my cheek, inhaled deeply, and began to read. The pages were yellowed around the edges, but the handwriting was steady, patient. The kind of penmanship from someone who didn't rush the truth. Ava, you were the only one who told what you saw, and they punished you because liars always fear the honest. My fingers tightened on the paper. I was 10 when the incident happened, the one that had followed me for years like a stain I couldn't scrub off. My parents always called it my phase of making things up. My sister called me the drama queen. My brother called me the troublemaker. But my grandfather wrote, "You didn't lie. They did." My vision blurred as memories came flooding back. I remembered that night so clearly. I'd walked into the kitchen for a glass of water and found my mother whisper yelling at my father, waving a stack of papers, bank statements, insurance forms, things I didn't understand at that age. All I remembered was my mother's voice. "If anyone finds out, we're done." And my father snapping back, "Then make sure no one does, especially her." I hadn't understood it at the time, but I remembered being dragged out of the room when they realized I was standing there. I remembered the way my mother's nails dug into my arm. I remembered being accused the next morning of snooping, of lying, of trying to start trouble. And then everything I said after that was treated like fiction. I was labeled dramatic, unstable, a problem. A 10-year-old girl carrying a truth adults were desperate to bury. My grandfather's letter continued. They forged signatures. They hid money. They committed insurance fraud twice, once after your father's business collapsed, and again when your brother totaled the car and blamed it on a stranger. You saw more than they realized. They knew you could expose everything if anyone believed you. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face now. He had known. He had known all along. That's why they isolated you, not because you were weak, but because you were a threat. My breath shook as I read those words. The next section wasn't a letter, it was documents, photocopies of forms with forged signatures, emails, bank transfers, photos of handwritten logs, even notes from conversations he'd overheard but never interfered in. My grandfather had been building this case silently for over 15 years. 15 years. He hadn't confronted them. He hadn't tried to fix anything. He had waited for the only person who deserved the truth to be old enough to receive it. A small slip of paper fell out from between the pages, folded twice, written in his softer handwriting. You were never invisible. They just hoped you would stay silent. I felt something shift inside me, like a weight I didn't know I was carrying finally cracked open and fell away. This wasn't closure. This was vindication. I flipped to the next document, a typed page with the heading, Full Account the Day They Cut Ava Out. My stomach tightened. I remembered that day. Of course I did. It was my 18th birthday. My parents had sat me down in the living room. My sister and brother watched from the doorway like I was being sentenced in some kind of family trial. My father told me, "You're old enough now. You have to take responsibility for your behavior." Behavior? I had barely spoken for months. I was quiet, withdrawn, doing everything I could to not spark any conflict. But my mother continued, "Until you apologize for everything you've done, for every lie you told, for every situation you twisted, we cannot have you in this family." I remembered whispering, my voice barely audible, "For what? What did I do?" My sister rolled her eyes. My brother scoffed. My father said simply, "You know what you did." That was it. No details, no examples. Just a vague, impossible accusation designed to shut me out forever. I remembered walking out that door with a backpack of clothes and a knot in my chest, so tight I couldn't breathe. I remembered waiting for a call, a text, a knock on my door, something, anything. Nothing ever came. Now, my grandfather's notes filled in the truth. They removed you so you couldn't expose what they were doing. They knew once you turned 18 you had rights. They feared your honesty more than they valued your presence. I pressed the letter to my forehead, letting the weight of it all sink in. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. My grandfather had known, had watched, had collected every piece of evidence, because he knew one day the truth would need a witness, and he believed I was the only one who deserved to carry it. As I sifted through the final pages, one short sentence stood out, circled twice in blue ink. "When the time comes, they will come for you. Be ready." I exhaled shakily. He was right, because even before I left the attorney's office, 3 missed calls had appeared on my phone. Mom, my sister Melissa, Dad. I stared at the screen. The storm was coming. And this time? I wasn't defenseless. I sat in my car long after the sun dipped behind the hills, long after the sky traded its gray for a bruised blue dusk. I hadn't moved. Not really. I just stared at my phone screen, at the missed calls stacking up like a countdown. My family, the same people who had erased me without hesitation, were suddenly desperate to talk. But they didn't know yet. They didn't know what I now held in my hands. They didn't know about the inheritance. They didn't know about the evidence. They didn't know that the girl they'd cut out was now the only one holding the truth. My phone vibrated. Another call, this time from my sister, Melissa, then a text. "We need to talk." I let the screen go dark. For years, those 4 words would have twisted my stomach. For years, I would have apologized, even when I didn't know what for. For years, I would have given them the benefit of the doubt. But not now. Not after reading page after page of how they orchestrated my exile. Not after learning how carefully they had lied, how easily they had scapegoated me, how willingly they had turned me into the family's problem just to protect themselves. I whispered to myself, my voice steady and unfamiliar. They need me. I don't need them. It was a truth I could finally say without shaking. When I got home to my small apartment, cozy, quiet, safe, I laid the envelope, the documents, and the letter on my kitchen table. Then I sat across from them, elbows on the wood, breathing deeply. "What do I do now?" I whispered to no one. I had no practice being the one with power, being the one with truth, being the one who wasn't guilty, broken, or delusional. I was used to shrinking, not standing, not confronting, but my grandfather's last note kept echoing in my mind. "When the time comes, they will come for you. Be ready." Then I heard it. A soft knock. 3 slow taps. Not frantic, not aggressive, intentional. I froze. Then stood. Moved quietly to the door, looked through the peephole. My stomach flipped. My mother, standing in the hallway, holding her purse like it weighed 100 pounds. My sister behind her, eyes red. My brother leaning against the wall, pretending he wasn't nervous, but absolutely failing. I didn't open the door. Not fully. I cracked it just enough to see them clearly, and for them to see the calm in my eyes. My mother spoke first. "Ava, sweetheart, we just want to talk." Sweetheart, the same woman who once said, "I don't care where you go, just get out of this house." I didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't tremble. "What do you want?" My father stepped forward. "We heard from the attorney. We think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Oh?" I tilted my head. "What did you misunderstand? That I exist? Or that Grandpa remembered me?" Melissa winced. My brother looked away. My mother pressed her lips together. "We didn't know," my mother whispered. "We had no idea he'd leave you that. It's just a shock." I nodded slowly. "There's more coming that will shock you." My father paled. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. Instead, I slid one single page through the cracked door, one photocopy from the envelope, a forged signature, my mother's handwriting, on an insurance claim. My mother's breath caught. My sister whispered, "Oh my God." My father took a step back as if the paper had teeth. I said softly, "You erased me to protect yourselves. Grandpa didn't let you." My mother's eyes filled with tears. Real or fake, I didn't care anymore. "Ava, wait, we can fix this as a family." I shook my head. "No, you don't get to fix what you broke just because the consequences finally showed up." I closed the door, firmly. My mother's muffled voice cracked through the wood. "Ava, please!" My sister tried again. My father said my name once more, desperate and hollow. I walked away from the door, their voices finally fading into nothing. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't falling apart. I felt, for the first time in years, steady, anchored, free. I sat back at the kitchen table, looked down at the evidence again, and whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." And then came the moment I'll never forget. The moment everything truly ended, or maybe the moment everything truly began. There was one final letter, handwritten, from my grandfather, and the attorney told me it was meant to be read out loud, in front of everyone. I don't know if you can imagine what that felt like, holding a piece of paper that contained years of silence, years of pain, years of truth that had been buried under lies. My hands shook as I unfolded it, but my voice was steady. I read, "To my granddaughter, the only one who ever saw me as more than a bank account." I could feel every relative in that room tense up. The only one who visited when the others argued about who deserved my money. My uncle jerked like he'd been exposed under a spotlight. The only one who never asked me for anything, which is why you deserve everything. My mother whispered, "No, no, no." But I kept reading. "I know what they did to you. I know how they shut you out. I know the lies they told. And I know what they tried to hide from me." The room cracked open with shock and shame. This money is not a gift. It is compensation for every birthday missed, every holiday you spent alone, every cruel word spoken about you when you weren't there to defend yourself. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. "I leave you $750,000 because you, my dear, are the only one in this family who did not lose her soul chasing a number." My mother broke. She sat down hard, like the truth had punched her straight through the ribs. Meanwhile, the rest of the family stared, ruined, exposed, humiliated, realizing the man they tried to manipulate had seen through every single one of them. And then came the final line, the line that ended everything. "Please do not let them make you feel small again. You are the only part of this family I am proud of." I lowered the letter. None of them spoke, because there was nothing left to say. And as I walked out of that office with the lawyer, inheritance secured, truth on the table, my grandfather's love wrapped around me like armor, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. For the first time in my entire life, I felt free. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been blamed for things you didn't do, if you've ever been the scapegoat, I want you to know, you're not crazy. You're not the problem. And somewhere, someone sees you, really sees you. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes vindication comes when you least expect it. But the truth always finds a way.